Pinky and the Brain, Issue 26. It starts off with Pinky and Brain on the ship to the American colonies because of time travel. Pinky asks where they're going to find an advanced intellect. And he has a point since a lot of Brain's plans are ruined by his lack of common sense. A woman beside them cries, saying a bunch of stiltedly wordy dialogue. Pinky feels bad for her and Brain calls her Hammy, even though he looks like he felt bad for her earlier. And Pinky calls her dress revealing when it barely counts. Brain says his inventions would improve the quality of life here. Why is he going to another place to do that? If he's going here because it's further away from the British Army, they'd still bother him eventually if he took over. In earlier time periods, he'd be far more likely to get in trouble for saying he wants to overthrow any government. Because anyone would get in trouble, and them not looking like a threat wouldn't matter. Pretty soon, Brain ends up tied up and put on trial for trying to take over the new world with his machines, which are called evil. How did he fail? I'd have liked to see that. And the woman's on trial because everyone's sick of her complaining. They're told to wear a scarlet cabbage above their head for the rest of their lives. And two men that remind me of Mad Max expect them to deal with it. Brain says it's clearly a cabbage and not lettuce. And he's told a drummer would follow them anytime they'd come to town, and that's made to be Pinky. After Brain tries to relax in a little hot tub in a house, Pinky thinks the smell of cabbage on him is nice as Brain takes a nap. He goes closer to him, and I guess the reason Brain opens his eyes is that he heard Pinky sniffing and knew he was close to him. Pinky says he's just admiring, and then he changes the subject, saying that his tub smells great and he wants to drink it. It cuts ahead in time because he did, and realistically doesn't feel so good. And his burp is somehow loud enough to make the natives want those Puritans out of here. And it destroys the house they somehow had to themselves. Pinky apologizes, as I wonder if this ability of his is going to be used as a weapon. Soon Pinky drinks his anti-gas formula, and he says that after he'd make the colony eat a tasty batch of his scarlet lettuce soup, he'd tell them that he'd only give them this formula if they make him the leader. He'd have to get them all to drink that water while all together and then tell them his threat. Brain pulls a wagon with a container of the water behind him and plans on selling the soup, even though there's no reason anyone would buy it from him if he was given a scarlet lettuce out of hatred. I thought he was gonna secretly replace their water at a festival. Pinky has to keep drumming, and a lot of noise gets made because everyone starts drumming for fun for some reason. I feel like that wouldn't happen. Brain tells them to shut up and then gets glared at, so when he tells them to have some soup, he's lucky they all decide to have some. I thought they were gonna run at him and beat him up. One of them agrees to make him the leader if he gives them his formula. And Brain tells Pinky to fetch the barrels of Braino. You mean he didn't already have them right there? The natives decide to go after them with weapons and get burped at and decide to run away. One of them calls them out on their stench, which is historically accurate. They didn't bathe much. So the colonists don't feel like accepting his formula anymore because they're going to use it as a weapon, and they want Brain's soup recipe, and they're intimidating him so it's not like he could charge them for it. Piggy mentions Brain's plan, which was already made obvious anyways, and the two of them get banished from Plymouth for trying to overthrow it, as well as a woman, who reunites with her husband, who tells his wife to keep the cabbage on even though she wants to take it off. Piggy says he loves happy endings. Even if he tried the same plan again, while the natives wouldn't have shown up again, everyone would have taken back saying they're going to make him the leader after getting the formula because they'd be scared of the current leader, and Brain didn't show he was capable of overthrowing him. Even if he got it in writing, they'd get kicked out with him. In the next story, Pinky skis and gets shocked for some reason in a banana sundae and asks Brain why he did that. Brain says his device will permanently melt the Earth's entire supply of ice cream. That's pretty evil, of course. They'd have to have witchcraft in it to do that. Otherwise, how could it be so specific and find all of the ice cream? He says he bought the patent to frozen yogurt at a garage sale. That's impossible. So he wants to make a fortune. But other people can make frozen yogurt and new ice cream too, and they'd have the means to distribute it better and make more of it than him. He doesn't have a way to make everyone else incapable of making more, so his plan's stupid. Piggy compliments him, and he says he needs one more thing for his plan. Pinky doesn't understand his sarcasm and turns on the TV to watch the news, which reports on someone becoming the first female Navy SEAL after a lawsuit. The woman shown on TV, it makes it obvious with her dialogue that becoming a SEAL sucks, so I don't know how she's genuinely smiling. Piggy says nose rings are kinda passé by now. And Brain says he'll use a species discrimination lawsuit. There's no law for that to back him up. Why does he think he could get this to work when he's legally considered not a person but a lab mouse? But instead, the story cuts ahead of his lawsuit and it was successful. It'd only be successful if he got accepted as a person. Then how'd he be able to stay a lab mouse? Someone tells him and the other SEALs that they won't last a day in training. There's no reason for why Pinky honks a clownish horn and brought his own equipment. Naturally, he and Brain are called jokers and told to do push-ups. Why was Brain punished when only Pinky did it? Brain calls him out on this, and a trainee trips on Pinky while running and rings the bell by mistake. How did he not see Pinky and go around him? Hitting the bell caused him to get thrown out, but that did him a huge favor. Now he doesn't have to go through miserable training for no reason. Eventually, it gets interesting when Brain wants to use an exoskeletal robot suit for himself, and give one to Pinky too to have super strength for both of them. How'd he get them here? Not to mention they're so obvious they can be seen, and you'd think Brain would be well known for his technology. But instead of the sergeant punishing them for obviously cheating at the training, he insults the other trainees, when it's obvious that it'd be impossible for mice to push these boulders without something to help them. Like magic technology like this. Pinky happens to bring a sardine container with him from off screen, and he offers Brain some to eat. But when he gets yelled at to get back to work, he gets startled into squeezing it and sending the liquefied sardines out. And they over-lubricate the joints of the suits, causing them to throw the trainees around them. Pinky apologizes, and even though he says exoskeleton, the sergeant still says he doesn't know how they did that. Though it's true that he doesn't know how the exoskeletons work, so he literally doesn't know how he did that. And it's not like he prefers Pinky and Brain over the other trainees, because if he was the type to give preferential treatment to them, he wouldn't have punished Brain for something Pinky did. Brain's too tired to hit Pinky for this mistake that he could have easily not made trying to eat in the middle of training. All of the trainees would hate them by now, so there's no reason one of them would offer Pinky a handshake. Pinky thanks him for the compliment, and he should have known better than to try to shake his hand with super strength that could have really helped them on a lot of their plans. Couldn't they try to take over the world with the super strength of those suits alone? Pinky throws someone into the bell, so he doesn't have to suffer here anymore either. And then we see Pinky wearing a different outfit like everyone else. He's told to shut up by everyone for being annoying and talking too much. It's refreshing to see someone other than Brain get annoyed with him. Pinky wants to catch rings on his nose like a real SEAL for fun, and Brain wonders where he got those rings. Pinky mistook the grenades for underripe pineapples because he's really new to the world, and doesn't watch the right TV. So Brain grabs Pinky and jumps away from an explosion that sends the other trainees upwards and gets rid of their clothes, but magically doesn't actually hurt them for no reason at all. One of them hits the bell, so at least he doesn't have to suffer through training anymore. Brain calls Pinky out on this, and the trainees are told to do another test where they're wearing swimsuits and flippers. Brain says in front of all of them, and the sergeant, that he'll slip away from the exercises and steal the stealth ski. Why won't anyone try to stop him after he admitted that? He should have had a whispering text bubble. He talks to Pinky to make sure he attached the rope to the raft, and we see the other trainees getting thrown upwards by the rope as the raft goes away. And one of them gets thrown into the bell. The sergeant calls them quitters instead of realistically getting mad at Pinky and Brain, who would have been thrown out a while ago. Why does he always jump at the excuse to throw people out of the training when it's always obvious that they didn't hit the bell on purpose? I always assumed that he just wants to throw people out of training that badly. It'd make more sense if he was trying to do them a favor because now they don't have to deal with training anymore. Brain says there's the stealth ski right behind some guards who would turn around and see him and Pinky. But somehow they don't and do nothing to stop Brain from driving out to sea. Brain tells Pinky to reel in the ski. Brain says he's got the modulator, but says to keep low because the Navy will be looking for them. Pinky balances a valuable device on his nose in front of some seals and attracts attention because of it, getting a boat to go towards them. Pinky gets called out and apologizes, and the Coast Guard scares Brain. A lot of the people in the Coast Guard are former trainees, and one of them sarcastically says that he wants to show his appreciation because they had to join the Coast Guard because of them. They get put in the bell and it's hit with a hammer, which of course never would have happened if Brain had the common sense to bring a stun gun with him. Like, bring something that could deal with these people. I guess the shapeshifter ray is just too overpowered for him to invent. And it cuts ahead to them back in the cage at home. Pinky doesn't care enough to keep staying quiet when Brain's holding an ice pack against his head because it's still ringing. How? This must have been back when he hadn't made himself able to heal really fast yet, but it's confusing because it's such a late story. Pinky and the Brain, issue 27. Pinky and Brain are on their way to Stonehenge in the winter, and Pinky says he loves this cold, creepy ambience, but he doesn't look like he loves it, so this would only make sense if he was being sarcastic. Brain thinks Stonehenge is a fortune-telling monument for some unexplained reason, so he thinks he'll be able to take over the world after using it to predict the future. For no reason. Even though he's a scientific mind. So already the plan's doomed to fail, and it's all about the journey in the story. Brain explains that he had them transferred to England as part of the lab mice exchange program that never exists. He wouldn't say this because Pinky would already know, and doesn't need to be reminded, although he is surprisingly forgetful. Pinky says it's like they're being watched by evil eyes for no reason, and thinks Salisbury steaks are made of mice out of paranoia, which is out of character. So at least Brain tries to explain it as Pinky drinking too much caffeine. They hear a hissing noise, and a rabbit with red eyes for no reason jumps at them to attack them. But they're fine afterwards, and Pinky talks as if he's gotten hurt a lot worse. So them being in this condition would only make sense if they really did heal super fast. Pinky complains that he doesn't have a running wheel, and they serve the food pellets at room temperature. That won't happen either. Brain says that according to his research, they were attacked by a monster that causes its victims to turn to monsters every full moon. It'd only be here if a witch summoned it. It happens to them, and it cuts ahead to them being told to go back to their hotel in the morning. They're whined at for sleeping at the zoo for no reason, and get told that their lucky nuns discovered them. How did they discover them? The cop tells them to stay inside until he finds the werebeasts. Pinky says that's them, but Brain stops them from talking and thanks the cop. Then they see the damage they caused in their werebodies. Sure, it's inconvenient that they don't remember anything they did at night as werewolves for no reason. Brain tells Pinky he'll help him steal the crown jewels by taking advantage of their werewolf forms. Pinky's morally opposed to that, and Brain writes down a note for his alter ego to read, reminding himself of the plan to steal a bunch of jewels. He says the sky's the limit with his intelligent mind. I wonder if this means he's stupid as a werewolf. Yep. He talks in a stupid way and tears up the note for having no pictures. Pinky and Brain would have gotten famous for all the trouble they caused trying to take over the world, so Brain being good at technology would be common knowledge. So you'd think people would assume these are Brain and Pinky after they use science to transform themselves, because they still look a lot like their old selves. As Pinky and Brain have annoying dialogue the whole time, they go cause some damage and get told off for attacking National Treasure. As they're thrown out by cops, the word treasure reminds Brain of his original plan. And this time, Brain's actually able to assume that Pinky was just making a joke earlier by saying that Jules would miss his crown. He says that joke is still not funny. They run towards the British guards in front of the Tower of London, and they get scared into running away because of their fangs, even though the guards just call them rats. So that's weird. Couldn't they have tried to kick them? Some cops threaten them as Brain bends some bars, but there's a dust cloud for no reason, and the cops end up trapped in a cage that used to contain the treasure they're running off with. It turns to day, and they drop the treasure into the river. But that's good for them because the cops were after them, so they'd have gotten in trouble otherwise without the strength to escape carrying all of it. But Brain and Pinky can get anywhere they want, and we saw them flying in a little helicopter at one point. Brain even made his own blimp once, so logically they'd just come back with a blimp or something at night and get the treasure from there. Brain made a submarine at one point. They didn't fail the plan. They hid the treasure where only they would know to look for it. Brain wants to break the curse. So he goes to the were-bunny's lair, planning to confront it with some hammers. Pinky doesn't complain about the violent plan, which is out of character, and they end up threatened by a bunch of vampire bunnies. And it cuts to them in a blue dust cloud for no reason. Why does it keep censoring the slapstick all of a sudden? Their problem was they're outnumbered. And Brain says he needs a long tropical vacation. So the story ends with them getting white bat wings and having bangs at the end. But lucky for them, they aren't talking like they're idiots now. The next story is going to ignore this because the comic's got almost no continuity, so this has to be set in a different universe. The next story has Pinky try to scare a woman with threatening phone calls but failing because he's being too silly, and says a verbal tick of his, which you'd think would be recognizable to some people. And while it's creative of him to threaten to eat all of her chocolate ice cream, she points out that she doesn't have any stairs for him to hide under. Eventually, after Brain tries for a more science fiction threat, she whistles into the phone, and she somehow accuses them of trying to ask her for a date. Brain wonders how he's supposed to scare all of the babysitters in the world, forcing the world's leaders to stay at home with their kids. Why does he only include teenage babysitters and not nannies, which the rich use? Does he not know about nannies because he's too young? His plan is doomed to failure. Pinky asks Brain what he knows about teenage girls, and asks Brain who's a cute guy in a bunch of TV shows. Pinky says he's not hip, and references an auntie apparently has. He says he knows about the stuff from watching a TV channel. Brain admits he has a point, and plans on going where teenage girls go to do research for the plan on how to scare them. He decides to go to the mall, and Pinky uncharacteristically screams at a headless human suit after Brain remote controls it. He screams because the suit's really outdated, and Brain agrees to listen to his fashion suggestions, which horribly backfires. Either way, he still has his actual head poking out of the suit. Not to mention a mouse is poking out of the suit. Why does he think he'd ever be allowed to hang around with those girls looking like this? Somehow none of them comment on how he looks, because they don't want to state the obvious, when I wouldn't expect them to be above being impolite. Eventually they scream at seeing Pinky, only for Pinky's ability to talk to impress them. You'd think they'd have already recognized them from their misadventures. The thing is though, there's no proof that almost every episode of the show and comic don't take place in a different universe from each other. Brain can make a time machine. Brain agrees to let them fondle him all they want, and picks him up for one of them to pet him. Too bad he's upset because he's being pet too hard. They agree to let him hang out with them just to have Pinky around because he's cute. Brain and Pinky's dialogue make it obvious that they really don't want to be there, just because the girls are putting on lipstick and brushing their hair somehow. But the girls don't seem to care about their feelings. They definitely don't, because Brain ends up getting makeup put on thanks to them. The human suit gets given new outfits, and when Brain finally asks them what scares them, realistically he doesn't get a proper answer from them. One of them invites them to a sleepover to torment them some more. Not that they admit that. And they all ignore him when he says he can't go on like this as they're talking about boring gossip. It makes sense because they've got no reason to like Brain and plenty to want to torment him. Maybe they do recognize him. This would be less confusing if it was explained that they were bothering him on purpose, because they won't stay oblivious of how he's feeling. Finally, one of them says she's scared of bad hair days. Then a girl mentions her phone, which somehow connects to every girl in the tri-state area. So Brain gets an idea on how to use her phone to scare them all at once. But he says this with no indication that he's not being overheard. But he must be out of earshot, because otherwise there'd be consequences. Later on, Pinky's out of the robot suit because the girls all fell asleep. And Brain hands Pinky a sonic disruptor. He fortunately explains how he made it, even if he had to ruin a garage door opener to do so. And he trusts Pinky to use the auto dial and start calling while he naps. I keep assuming it's out of laziness that he trusts Pinky to do stuff while he's not doing anything that matters, but you'd think he would have learned his lesson. I'm guessing Pinky will fail because he was trusted to do something. He uncharacteristically complains about this, and somehow sees a piece of paper relating to what he's been going through all day, which advised them to call someone other than who he was told to. He could wait first. The next morning, he tells Brain he did call every girl in the tri-state area, but then isn't sure, and says that he spent a long time talking to a celebrity. But then one of the girls' fathers bursts into the room angry about a bill for an all-night call. I don't know if it's realistic for him to get that bill so fast. It's not like credit card bills show up the next day. He says he spoke to every other dad in the tri-state area, which he definitely wouldn't do. And they all got the same bill. Piggy sure caused a lot of trouble. So he says that all of the girls have their phone privileges revoked. The story ends with Brain talking like a stereotypical teenage girl for no reason. At least this had a plot that wasn't based on another work of fiction. And Piggy's right, he did find out what teenage girls were scared of. So you'd think Brain wouldn't be disappointed and think his plan failed yet. The first story by Jesse McCann had Brain get told to keep a scarlet cabbage on his head as a punishment from the Puritans, based on the Scarlet Letter, and take a bath to feel better. And when Piggy drinks it because of how it smells, his burp magically destroys the house. So he tries to get Puritans to elect him as the leader because they conveniently agree to drink some water and felt gassy afterwards. He offers them a formula to make them feel better, but then some natives try to attack and get scared away by their burp, and that causes them to not want the formula anymore. It was never going to work anyways because the people would go back on their word as soon as they'd be expected to deal with the real authority figures. I wish I saw how Brain tried to take over the place with machines first, because it seemed to be the more obvious, likely to work plan. And I don't see how it'd fail. How are Puritans supposed to win against a bunch of robots? The second story by Jesse is about Brain and Pinky going through Navy SEAL training they're allowed to do for no realistic reason to steal something. Brain somehow allowed an exoskeletal suit to give himself super strength for it. He tries to steal something he needs for his doomed-to-fail ice cream melting plan. But of course Pinky attracts too much attention having some fun with seals. So the Coast Guard catches them, and the former trainees actually end up getting back at them. While the grenades going off near some people was a bad thing, they weren't hurt afterwards for some reason. So all they did was spare people the misery of training and being a Navy SEAL. They'd have it easier being a part of the Coast Guard. The first story by Jesse McCann was about Pinky and Brain getting jumped at by an animal, and ending up changing forms and becoming stupider for 2 nights. After they decided to go to Stonehenge because Brain believed in the supernatural. There's no attempt at an explanation for why the were-rabbit and vampire rabbits are there, so I have to assume witches sent them there out of spite after a bad time vacationing in England. At first Brain forgets his original plan as a werewolf, but then hearing the word treasure reminds him, and he's incredibly competent afterwards, effortlessly stealing some treasure with Pinky. But then they turn back to normal and drop it into the water. But why do they act like the plan failed? They can get anywhere they want, so they'd have no trouble getting the treasure back. They could use a submarine again, and a helicopter again. I always hate when the story ends, even though their plan didn't technically fail. The second story by Jesse has Brain plan on getting the world leaders stuck at home with their kids by scaring the teenage babysitters of the world. Because he and Pinky have no idea that nannies exist. And they don't get the idea that the world's leaders could simply ask somebody else who isn't a teenage girl to babysit. So they try to find out what teenage girls are afraid of by asking to hang out with them at the mall, despite his head sticking out of a robotic human suit. But he was allowed to hang out with them anyways, and even go to sleepover, because they all liked petting Pinky. But if they like him, why did they pet him too hard after he complained about it? It's more believable that they are intentionally torturing them, because of how they look and their reputations. Because there's no way they'd remain oblivious to their feelings when they complained so much. So I wish that was explained instead of the story being confusing. For the most part, it's just a tedious, boring story where the teenage girl parodies have boring, stereotypical dialogue. I'm used to reading Archie comics, where the parodies of the teenage girls aren't nearly this exaggerated without any humanizing qualities and moments. So I found these characters jarring. It's too bad this had to be the final story in the comic. The only thing I really like about it is that it's not a plot ripping off some other work of fiction. And usually that makes the story one of the best stories in the series.